Aloha, it's your host, Gabe Morales. I grew up around a lot of Pacific Islanders, and I have some family, Ohana, born and raised in Hawaii, and I lived there for many years. It is often seen as paradise, and indeed it is, but it also has a dark side that many tourists don't see. There is a lot of substance abuse in some poor areas, and there are also active gangs in some areas. So, how did it get to be this way? First, let me be very clear here that the vast majority of Pacific Islanders are not drug addicts or gang members, but I bet you know some who are. And before we get into understanding why some gravitate to the gang lifestyle and self medicate and participate in other self destructive behaviors, let's first take a look at the history of these beautiful places and rich, diverse cultures. The history of the Pacific Islands is a story of ingenuity, adventure, resilience, and kinship. With the development of the outrigger canoe around 5,000 years ago, groups of courageous individuals took to the seas to find new lands among the thousands of islands in the Pacific Ocean. Far from being a barrier, the ocean provided opportunity and connection. It provided food and it provided culture. The communities that settled on the islands shaped them into fertile grounds for prosperity, creating techniques for sustainable agriculture, some of which are still used today. They remained connected to a broader community through a series of networks to other islands, and they often maintained family ties through trade and ceremonial gift exchanges. When the European colonizers first explored the islands in the 1500s, they were met by hundreds of different cultures, each unique but often having common traits. In 1778, Captain James Cook landed on the shores of Hawaii. He was an exceptional navigator, and his countrymen regarded him as a natural hero in his efforts to found an exclusive Northwest Passage and a gateway to the Pacific Northwest. At first, Cook was welcomed almost as a god. The natives were amazed by his ship and his modern weapons, but the warm reception grew thin quickly when the natives were exposed to diseases for which they had no immunity, and they began dying by the thousands. It was at that time they thought maybe Cook and his men were a curse. Tensions rose, and a number of quarrels broke out between the Europeans and Hawaiians at Kealakekua Bay. An unknown group of Hawaiians took to one of Cook's small boats, and that evening the cutter boat was taken, and Cook and his men felt that the people were insolent and disrespectful towards him. Cook attempted to kidnap and ransom the king of Hawaii, King Kalaniʻopuʻo, the following day, on February 14th, 1779. Cook marched through the village to retrieve the king by his own hand and led him away. One of the king's favorite wives, Kaneakepole, and two chiefs approached the group as they were heading towards the boats to take the king away. They pleaded with them not to take the king. An old kahuna priest was chanting rapidly while holding a coconut and attempted to distract Cook and his men as a large crowd began to form at the beach shore. At this point, the king began to understand that Cook was his enemy. As Cook turned his back to help launch the boats, he was struck in the head by one of the villagers and then stabbed to death as he fell on his face in the surf. This was the beginning of the end. The haoles, the whites, came back in bigger and bigger numbers, destroying much of the culture, but the people resisted, and today they retain many of their old ways. A similar thing happened to Micronesia, the Philippines, Tonga, Samoa, New Zealand, and other South Pacific islands. The people were colonized, victimized, and their culture changed forever. Some say that gangs today feel the need for young men to express warrior ways. I disagree, and I'll state why towards the end. To understand the impact and trauma on Native peoples, I highly recommend you view a movie called Once Were Warriors. I also recommend that you check out a YouTube channel called 30 to Life, hosted by a Pali brother who covers many topics concerning Pacific Islanders and has many guests who are ex-offenders as well as people who are currently doing time for crime. You might also want to check out my book on Pacific Islander gangs that can be purchased on Amazon.com. This video will cover gangs of Hawaii and all kinds of Pacific Islander gangs. Again, I do not mean to diminish the proud culture of my Pali brothers and sisters. On the contrary, I highly respect and love their cultures. Many people even think I'm Hawaiian, and while I have no royal blood in me, I feel the aloha and mana for that special place. If you go into Honolulu's Chinatown today, you will find many good shops and restaurants, and it is relatively safe for tourists. But if you venture just a block or two away, you will find out it is not so safe, with many homeless roaming around, drug addicts, drunks, and mentally ill people, and there are often violent incidents in the area. In the old days, military men and tourists often partied at night in Honolulu's Chinatown. In 1962, George Yobo Chung formed his own criminal organization, recruiting among local Chinese, Koreans, Japanese Samoans, as well as native Hawaiians, who had become an impoverished minority on the islands. They also despised the Haoles, the whites' intrusion on their lands. Before Chung's time, there were some smaller, different ethnic gangs who vied for control, but they often got into clashes amongst each other. Chung was able to create an environment where every gang could do business, but his efforts only lasted about 5 years. In July 1967, Chung was shot to death in a Honolulu gambling den shortly after Senny Kim, a Korean crime boss, had his legs mangled from a bomb blast. Many believe the death of Chung was related, as no arrests were made in either case. Chung's death led to a power vacuum of organized criminal activities on the island, with crime bosses rivaling for control. A primarily Samoan mob group under leadership of Alema Leona, who also ran for state governor, briefly took over. In 1969, Wilfred Pulua, a native Hawaiian and a lieutenant of Leona, decided to recruit primarily among local criminals of native Hawaiian heritage and form a statewide syndicate that would become known as the Company. Pulua's reign ended in 1973 when he started heavily investing criminal money in real estate. When Pulua's leadership ended, the company became more prone to infighting because several lieutenants and criminal families in the organization again competed over leadership. Names in the Hawaiian underworld, such as the Joseph family, Henry Hui Hui, and Ronald Kailalu Ching, all become increasingly well known. Ching ended up killing a state senator, the son of Honolulu prosecutor Charles Marshallese Jr., as well as being involved in 2 other murders. One of his victims was buried alive. Ching died in Halava prison on Oahu in 2005. A former Honolulu police vice sergeant and later on Big Island rancher named Larry Mayhow was accused by some of being the godfather of Hawaiian organized crime. Others said he was a hero who mediated disputes between rival gang leaders to keep violence down. And he was a close friend of famed Hawaiian crooner Don Ho. Mayhow died on December 15, 2015, still fighting allegations that he was ever involved in organized crime. Currently, organized crime in Hawaii is closer to what it was in the 1960s, with different ethnic crime groups such as the Triads, Yakuza, Korean mob, Samoan, and Native Hawaiian crime syndicates, including remnants of the company, all operating within the state. I've talked to several state of Hawaii gang investigators like Larry Myers and Larry Visitacion, as well as Ben Griego, who oversaw gang investigations at the Saguaro complex in Arizona, where many Hawaiian criminals are shipped out. I've worked with Kyle Enriquez, who has experience with the Hawaii Department of Public Safety Corrections Division, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, as well as being a sergeant at a correctional facility in the Seattle-Tacoma area. He was born and raised on the islands and grew up around many of these people. In addition, I personally know many Hawaiian cops and talked to many former convicts about the Hawaiian underworld over the years. So I'd say I have a little idea what I'm talking about. From my observations, many rival gang members will come together as islanders when faced with a common threat. In addition, Mexican drug cartels are shipping meth to places like the Big Island, which is then spread out among smaller dealers. In the past, a lot of this meth, also known as batu, came in from the Philippines. No matter whether it comes from the east or the west, it is a poison in many Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. More than 4,000 inmates live packed in like sardines in one of the most densely populated corners of the Philippines. Around the time of World War II, the Bahalana gang started inside large and dangerous Manila correctional facilities. Manila is the capital of the Philippines. The literal translation of Bahalana is "come whatever may," which is used to indicate that life was hopeless and that it really didn't matter what one did if fate was against you. This value of fatalism can be seen in numerous tattoos original members of the Bahalana had. The Sige Sputnik gang started in 1958 inside the Philippine jails and prisons. In 1968, 14 members of the gang were sentenced with lifetime imprisonment for killing members of the opposing gang in a riot. In 2012, Dionoso Dennis Hamores, the leader of the Sige Sputnik gang, was shot dead by angry inmates inside the Bilibid Max prison after a dispute over a billiards game. So as you can see, the place was very violent. Some of the first Filipino gangs that I remember in Washington State during the 1970s were the Tulisans, the Bandits, or the Unggoys, the Monkeys, and the Cuckoos, the Crazies, or Culigos. They terrorized the local Filipino community, and I remember them going into discotheques that I attended back in the 1970s, and the seas parted as these short little Filipino gangsters strolled in, a line. Nobody messed with them, as they knew they were dangerous.
I do. The Filipino gangs were the ones who were taking over the discotheque clubs at the time, which were the Unggoys and the Tulisans, and then they had this other group called the Kuligus.
Cool. And those are Filipino gangs?
Yes, those are Filipino gangs.
I remember back then also, like, back at the Reflections, I remember there was a couple Filipino gangs called the Tulisans and Unggoys that walked in, and people, like, it was like the parting of the Red Seas. People got out, and these are little Filipino guys, Pinoys, 5 foot tall, in their platforms, and but they definitely people knew that these guys were not to be messed with. Can you tell us a little bit about back then some of the gangs that were running around Seattle?
Well, I was so young, but I remember both the Tulisans and the Unggoys, but I was mostly friends with the Unggoys because one of my close friends was part of the Unggoys, and that's how I got to know the leader, Ferdy Urbino, because he was also a karate instructor and very popular in Seattle for teaching karate and winning in tournaments. But I just remember that those two gangs didn't get along.
They were involved in the homicide of 2 progressive county worker union organizers in the Pacific Northwest. On June 1st, 1981, union leaders Sumi Domingo and Jean Virnes were gunned down in cold blood inside a Pioneer Square building located close to the International District in downtown Seattle. Also, remember, it's very common for old Filipino men to line up for jobs in the area. Many times they would go to Alaska to work in the canneries up there. 3 gangsters, one armed with a .45 caliber MAC-10 semi-automatic pistol, stepped through the front door of the Cannery Workers Local 37 on South Main Street. One gangster kept lookout while others searched the building for their victims. Then they killed them. Before he died, Domingo was able to identify Jimmy Ramil and Popeo Guloy as his executioners. It was later found out that local Tulisan gangsters had acted on the orders of Fortunado Tony Dictado, who felt the 2 union organizers were adversely affecting his gambling rackets. Union President Constantine Tony Barroso honored the 2 dead men after the shocking deaths, but as it turns out, he actually arranged the hit. He was implicated when it was found out that the murder weapon was registered to him. Prosecutors could not get the jury in criminal court to agree that the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos also helped in the conspiracy to kill the 2 men, but many believe that to be true. Later on, a civil court ruled that Marcos was implicated in the killings via Barroso because of the bad publicity concerning corruption that targeted Filipino workers on the West Coast all the way up to Alaska. The court said that Marcos should pay restitution for the killer's acts. Barroso died in Washington State Prison in November 2008. He was 80 years old. The Santanas Gang is a Filipino-American street gang that started in Southern California in 1972. It is believed to be the oldest original Filipino street gang in Los Angeles and allegedly broke off from the Temple Street Gang, which largely had a Chicano and Mexican-American membership. One of the Santanas founders was named Billy West. Another founder was a former Sige Sputnik. Rivals of the Santanas included White Tigers, the Bahalana Gang, Pinoy Real, the Avenues, and 18th Street. This is how I was told they were started. In 1972, a Santana car club was started in the Los Angeles area by some Filipino-American members who had formed a cultural bond. At first, the club was exclusively for Filipinos, or Pinoys, who came around to socialize. but they soon branched off into other Southern California cities, including San Diego, La Puente, Cerritos, Oxnard, Long Beach, and even reached all the way back to the Philippines. Some of these members formed the Santanas gang, which was estimated at one time to have about 500 members. In 1985, several Santanas members were convicted. Let me know if you have a different version of how they formed. I've heard several. Some other Filipino gangs, such as the Demonios and Diablos, claim their roots to the Santanas and originated among second-generation gang members and younger siblings and individuals who were members of the Santanas. Another predominantly Filipino gang was Sarsana, but they also included other ethnic groups. Sometimes they fought against the Santanas, as well as against Chivas, Arta 13, and 18th Street. Luzon, Visayan mobsters sometimes aligned with Sarsana. Both of these gangs were most active in the 1990s, but there's still a few around. Pinoy Real was very active in places like the San Fernando and San Gabriel valleys, located in the LA area. They were founded in the early 1980s in Atwater Village, which is located about 10 miles northeast of downtown. Pinoy is a Tagalog direct term for a Filipino male, and Real is Spanish, which means royal, like a king. Together, this means Royal Filipinos. Pinoy Real members were predominantly Filipino, but they also had some Asians, Latinos, blacks, and whites. Pinoy Real did not sport specific colors or claim Bloods or Crips, but they would often wear black, as did Santanas. Pinoy Real will often wear Pittsburgh Pirates apparel for the P. They were known to be involved in home invasions, kidnapping and torture, extortion, arson, auto theft, robberies, sales of illegal narcotics, assaults, shootings, and homicides. Pinoy Real had a presence throughout Southern California, including Las Vegas, as well as back in the Philippines. In the early 1990s, near Ballard High School, which is located in the north part of Seattle, I recall that there was a carload of 23rd Diablos Crip members who went gunning for rival Bad Side Posse members. They missed Bad Side Posse, but struck a young girl named Melissa Fernandez, who had no affiliation. This shooting shocked and outraged the community, and soon both gangs became defunct. Other active Filipino gangs in Washington State have been Flipside, who at one time banged Bloods, and Zimangats, who had first, second, and third generation. This was not grandfather, father, and son. This went by age group. Every few years, a new group of Zimangats would bang Crip. As I stated, Samoan and Tongan gangs have been present in Hawaii as well as the mainland. They have been active in places like the Seattle-Tacoma area in Washington State, San Jose in Northern California, the greater Los Angeles areas of Carson, Compton, Inglewood, and Long Beach, as well as Las Vegas, Nevada, and Utah. They were documented in the greater Salt Lake area in the late 1980s by people like Detective Isileli Dalasinga, who worked closely with the Salt Lake Area Gang Project. They have been also housed in Arizona, where my friend Ben Griego worked as a gang investigator for many years. As I stated, some of this information is a result of their work, and some of this is my own. Robert Skiddo Sua and his brother Apolosio were from Hawaii. Robert was born in Honolulu and died in 2004. Meanwhile, John Thug Sua was a war party Crip, who are usually rivals of all Bloods. The Sua brothers end up forming the Uso family. Uso means brother in Samoan language. On or around December 1995, the Hawaii Department of Public Safety began to send inmates to the mainland because of overcrowding in the Hawaiian prison system. They placed inmates in various Texas jails because it was very affordable. These out-of-state placements were plagued by escapes, assaults, and homicides. According to the FBI's Honolulu division, Hawaiian inmates formed the Uso family in an Oklahoma prison in 1998. Uso family members were also documented in Tennessee and Minnesota, as well as Arizona. Gang members such as the FAM leader Prasenia Suasoi, aka Uncle George, war party leaders John Sua and Bryson Peralta, and Thug Hood Ulysses Kim, all eventually merged to form Uso family. The gang now has a membership between 800 to 1,000 members, depending on who you talk to. Today, it is the dominant gang in Hawaii prisons, but is also known to be active on the mainland. They will often tattoo Uso family for life to signify that they are a blood in, blood out prison gang. In 2013, a former Halava prison corrections officer, John Joseph Kale Hall, admitted to profiting from thousands of dollars of bribes paid to him by members of the gang. In that year, federal law enforcement officials announced the indictments of 17 Hawaiian inmates who were involved in a variety of criminal activities, including filing fraudulent tax returns and the distribution of meth and marijuana, better known as pakalolo by the locals. La Familia is a prison gang that was formed for protection against the Uso family. It was founded by Wallace Dito Rodriguez in the year 2000. Rodriguez was a former boxing champion and was found guilty of second-degree murder for firing 3 execution shots into the back of his cousin, Lorenzo Young's head. He was convicted of 2 other murders and was given a life sentence. La Familia deals in drug trafficking, and its current focus is recruiting new members. They are also known to be very confrontational with law enforcement in Hawaii, including the Big Island, and they are believed to be behind several shootings and homicides of cops in recent years. Scott Park Pyrus is a primarily Polynesian Samoan American street gang located on the east side of Carson, California. The Scott Park Pyrus originated in the early 1980s and were originally known as Scott Park Killers. They were named after a public park located on Catskills Avenue between 232nd Street and 236th Street. Westside Pyrus is a primarily Samoan street gang located on the West Side neighborhood around Figueroa Street between 220th Street and Carson Street. They were a spin-off gang from the Westside Pyrus located in the city of Compton, that is a primarily Black gang. Carson City Westside Pyrus received a lot of media attention after they were linked to the Booyah tribe, a Samoan rap group which sold over 1 million records. I met one of the Booyah tribe members at Folsom Prison way back in the day. Samoan and Black gangs in Carson have a long-standing racial-motivated feud with Hispanic Sur 13 gangs in Carson, who are backed up by the Mexican Mafia. The east side of Tacoma, Washington has always had a lot of blood activity. Royal Samoan Pyrus were identified in the city by the late 1980s. In more recent years, active Park Usos and the Samoan Mafia gang have been active. The Seven Deuce Mob was a local blood set that had both Black and Samoan gang members and was mentioned in the Pierce County Tacoma video on this channel. A street gang that was active in the mid-1980s was United Blood Nation, started by Reno OG Problem Child Maiava, Joker Maosao, Tiger Puapuga, and others. Reno did not get permission for the street gang, named after a predominantly Black California prison gang called United Blood Nation, when he got into trouble. Both of these groups preceded the East Coast United Blood Nation. I know some law enforcement on the East Coast are shaking their heads, but I know for a fact that both of these gangs predated the East Coast United Blood Nation that formed on Rikers Island in the early 1990s. A well-known criminal named Marcus Chaney was charged in late March 2022 with second-degree murder in connection with the fatal shooting of Reno at 3rd Avenue and Pine Street on February 27, 2022, allegedly over an argument about drugs. As I stated, the UBN in Washington was predominantly Samoan. It was aligned with Samoan tribe Pyrus, which were active in the Rainier Valley. Westside Mafia Bloods was another Samoan gang. The Mad Pack was an independent renegade Samoan gang that broke off from the Bloods, who were based in the now torn down High Point Projects area of West Seattle, where I grew up. It was very active back in the early 1990s, and they often fought Black gangs in the area, as well as Hispanic Sur 13s. Several Mad Pack members were incarcerated in the 1990s for murders or attempted murder. The nucleus of the Mad Pack gang was a large, extended Falatogo family. Like other gangs, Mad Pack had an initiation process, usually being a beat-in or crime-in. Aries A-Train Falatogo crimed in when he killed one person and wounded another at an Alki Beach park back in the early 1990s. The Mad Pack are now older and not much is heard from them anymore, although Iosia Slim Falatogo, an aspiring rapper, was killed by police on December 31st, 2018. The family filed a lawsuit in 2021 stating that he was racially profiled during a traffic stop. And I've heard rumors among gangsters and community members that he was killed just because of his last name and because of the family's association with Mad Pack. The Park Village Compton Crips, also known as the Ya Gang, are a mixed African-American Samoan gang located in the west side of Compton. Their turf is spread from Compton Boulevard in the north to Alondra Boulevard in the south, between Bloomington Avenue on the west and Center Street on the east. The heart of their neighborhood is centered around housing projects and a city park located just west of Compton High School. They were originally named after the Park Village housing projects, and they refer to the city of Compton as Yampton, alluding to the Ya gang name. I was told that the Sons of Samoa was originally a 1980s fraternal Samoan group that later became a gang in Hawaii. They spread from Hawaii to the Scott Park area of Carson, Long Beach, Corona, and San Jose, California. They also could be found in Salt Lake City, Utah, as well as places like Seattle, Washington. One of the first Samoan Crips I ever met worked for me in the kitchen at New Folsom Prison in 1987. Some of the first Sons of Samoa gangsters in Washington State were the Godfather, Failau, Stone One, Leotua, Coconut Poosa, Big Pep Lepetele, and Capone. Another influential SOS member was Tim Sleepy Munga, who had ties to Hawaii and Long Beach, California, and had a reputation for getting into confrontations with law enforcement. Samoan families are often very large and extended and stay close to their cousins, also known as cuz. The Facili family had members affiliated with the Sons of Samoa. After the death of David Facili in 2003, during a police encounter, numerous threats were made by the gang to local cops. Several Samoan gang members were involved in the 1996 murder of a couple in the South Park area of Seattle. I have heard some describe this incident as a Samoan blood robbery. This is incorrect. Two members were Mad Pack, and some early Mad Pack were Bloods, but they broke off as renegades. They spelled their name Mad Pack, P-A-K, no C-K, to indicate Bloods or Crip killers. Like I said, two were Mad Pack, and one was Sons of Samoa Crip, with ties to Long Beach. I personally know the Pierce County cop who stopped the crime crew after it happened and didn't know they were even involved until he was advised by a key investigator. I personally interviewed all involved while they're incarcerated at the King County Jail in Seattle. It was the first documented case where dog DNA helped convict them. One of the two involved, George Scooby Tulifano, was a known big-time drug dealer in the High Point projects where I grew up, and he became a top SOS leader in Washington, D.C. The other, Kenneth Saboclas Leuluilalili, was known as being very ruthless, and he claimed Mad Pack. Charles Crooknico from Mad Pack only entered after Claus shot their dog Chief and shot the couple multiple times, then handed the gun to Scooby, who fired at the male with two more shots. Crook and others present testified against Scooby and Claus in exchange for reduced sentences. They were convicted in 1998, but in 2003, the Washington State Court of Appeals ruled that the animal DNA could not be presented as evidence in a murder trial in the same way that human DNA evidence can be used. Nevertheless, the court upheld the convictions of the two men. There were also Tongan families who moved from Tonga to Hawaii and started Tongan Crips, as well as Tongans who moved to the Los Angeles area in the 1970s who joined gangs. In the Lenox-Inglewood area of California, some Tongan youth initially joined a predominantly black gang called the Raymond Avenue Crips. But the Tongan kids wanted their own identity and then started the Tongan Crip Gang. In Seattle, Washington, I have met Tongans who claim Tongan Crip Gang, as well as some that belong to Tongan Crip family. Like I said, Tongan Crips are also active in the Hawaiian island of Oahu, as well as Salt Lake City, Utah. In 2010, there was a RICO case brought against Tongan Crip gangsters in Utah that involved 17 men being charged, and a dozen were convicted and sentenced to the federal BOP for their crimes. The Marshall Islands is a country located near the equator in the Pacific Ocean. Politically, the Marshall Islands is a presidential republic in free association with the United States. In 2011, the number of island residents was estimated to only number about 72,000. However, there are many thousands more that moved to the United States due to the situation that I described at the beginning of this video. In Hawaii, Marshallese often live in community compounds. They will buy a lot together, save their money, build multiple shacks on it, like a village back home, until they can buy another lot, then bring more relatives over from the islands, or extend their families via more native-born children. Some of these Marshallese youth have become involved in gangs, and I have personally seen the damage done to their communities from meth. They often steal cars and commit burglaries to support their addiction. And while they're on meth, they often engage in assaults, sometimes not even knowing who they're assaulting, and sometimes assaulting people such as store staff when they steal. This is very sad to see, but people in places like Ocean View, Hawaii, know what I'm talking about. So how can we steer Pacific Islander youth away from the gang lifestyle? First, we should teach them to be proud of their rich culture and heritage, and let them know that gangs today are not the same as the ancient warriors of their ancestors. They should learn how to be successful in society. They should learn job skills as well as coping and life skills, and give back positively to the community, not inflict further harm and trauma on them. Second, we should educate parents, many of who have gone through generations of trauma, violence, and substance abuse. If they're not yet aware, we should teach them indicators of gang violence and when their youth are at risk, so we can prevent it and intervene quickly with assistance of social service providers. I believe 90% of kids can effectively be reached this way. Police and Pacific Islander community should be well trained, not just in tactics, but how to better understand and work with the Pacific Islander community. They need to be seen as an ally, not as just another historical enemy ready to abuse them. Police need our support to go after that 10% hardcore element who commit the majority of violence on their own community and on people outside of the community. There are also many church groups who can be utilized as a positive force for families and children. As you can see, Pacific Islander youth are sometimes attracted to the gang lifestyle, just as many other youth are. And it can be hard to steer them on the right path, but we must try. I hope you learned a thing or two from this video, and I welcome your respectful comments and views. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.